just a couple minutes to get started here. As always, my name is Ryan Tagg. I'm with Dominion Payroll. To give a brief intro, I've been running these DP Discovers for about 2 years now. Been with the organization 6, so you may be familiar with me. I am the sales director out of our Tampa location and also inside sales manager. Today I'm here with Karyn Rhodes. She is Senior Director, HR Solutions. And Karyn, just before we hop into the slide, give people a few minutes to get in here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Ryan. So nice to be with everyone today. So as Ryan said, Karyn Rhodes. I'm the Senior Director of HR Solutions. I've been in HR my whole career, which is a very long time now. Going back many years ago, I was internal HR for a couple companies. I have started a couple HR consulting firms in my career. The latest, we transitioned over to iSolved, which was about a year and a half ago. So I am, involved in HR issues, compliance, handbooks, policies, you name it. I've done it. I've heard about it. I've seen it. Not much surprises me anymore, Ryan, when it comes to employees. So it's great to be here with everyone today. And I'd love your questions, so if you do have questions, put them in the chat. Happy to answer them.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, pop those questions in there. I will keep an eye out, and we can stop and answer those as we go along, and then we'll also have a Q&A section at the end. Well, Karyn, thank you again for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about mastering retention. So I guess what is client retention? Start off with that if anybody doesn't know.
Yeah, really, really important, Ryan. We talk a lot about the employee experience, and we're going to talk about that today. But we know, the studies that we've done of HR managers across the country, we know recruitment is as challenging, if not more, in 2024 than in 2023. We're seeing a lack of qualifications coming in, and there's different strategies. But certainly, once we have hired employees, we don't want to lose them, especially talented people. And the amount of disruption it costs to lose a really talented person to the organization, you all know, I'm sure it's happened to you before, puts extra workload on other people, but just, this sort of gut check when somebody really valuable leaves the company, and then where are you going to find the next valuable person? It's very, very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with that said, Karen's put together a lovely presentation that I'll be driving, so be patient with me as we go through it, but we'll go ahead and get started. Give me 1 second.
Great. So today we're going to talk about employee experience. A long time ago, when we talked to companies, it was really focused on, compliance, what companies are doing from a compliance standpoint, and then employee benefits. Now, because of different pieces of legislation that passed, employee benefits have really leveled the playing field, right? So we don't really see people leaving from one employer to another because of employee benefits, but for sure, if that employee experience is not where it should be, this is where we see turnover and people looking for that better employee experience. So we're going to talk about some strategies. Love your questions if you have any. We'll talk a little bit about nonprofits that Ryan and I are engaged in. And then we'll talk about some recent compliance movements around non-competes, the FLSA, and I'll share with you some, sort of breaking news on both of those fronts and where we stand.
Perfect.
So I love this slide. If you didn't know, if you can go back one, Ryan. If you didn't know, this is called Newton's cradle. So as you know, when you pull one of these metal balls or spheres to the side, you release it, it hits the other balls, and the ball at the end comes up. You release it, and it comes back to the center, and so on and so forth. So we sort of see this pendulum as the continuum of the employer-employee interface, right? So the employer at times pulls back, may create policies, procedures, whatever that is, that has a ripple effect through the employees. At other times, we see employees having demands on the company and the similar effect happening. So, if you can advance the slide, Ryan. Thank you so much. So we have seen changing dynamics in the workforce. I mean, consider the past 5, 6 years, right? And what we've seen in our workplace. And we really, go back to COVID. So pre-COVID, there was a big conversation going on about flexibility in the workplace. And it really had to do the conversation between generations of people. So CEO, maybe in a different generation, everybody has to be in work, at their desk, working away. As we know, some of those people weren't working at all. They were playing games on their computers or shopping or whatever. But the mind frame from CEO, CFO was you have to be at your desk working, and that's how I know you're working. There was this constant pressure from younger generations, millennial, Gen Z, to a different type of work, to more flexibility in the workplace. So COVID happens back so many years ago, March, whatever that date was, 15th. People are sent home to work remotely, obviously for safety reasons. Technology, I know I can talk from my own experience, was a little wonky at first. People were trying to figure out how to use the technology in presentations that didn't go so well, so on and so forth. But then we figured it out, right? And we got over that hump with work. And what we found was that, boy, I kind of like this working remotely. I kind of like being here when my kids get off the bus or, dealing with mom or dad, helping them in their older years. And I can manage sort of a better work balance for myself. If I'm down between 12 and 1, I can go work out or ride my bike and come back to work. So from the employee aspect, they really loved this change, and embodied it and understood that, like with the flexibility we had talked about before, we finally drew this line to flexible work. So this was definitely the pendulum swinging forward to the employee side. You can advance the slide, Brian. Now, what we saw, of course, yin and yang here, was this pushback to the employers. The employers obviously are looking at a lot of different things that employees don't look at, like what is my revenue? What's the cost I'm spending on the buildings? We had a lot of senior teams spend millions of dollars on their workplaces, only to find, a quarter of them were full with people. So obviously a bad investment on their behalf. So they were forcing, as you know, employees to come back to the workplace, putting out demands, you need to come back to work. If you don't, you're going to be let go, so on and so forth. But what they found was employees pushed back again, this pendulum, saying that if you make me return to work, I'm going to leave and go somewhere else. And that's in fact what happened. A lot of employees left and have gone somewhere else. So whatever we see, and we can see this in compensation, employees want higher levels of compensation. Employers are always looking at the bottom line and revenue. And it's not that they don't want to pay their people, but they always have a tighter fist when it comes to increases in things like compensation, benefits, looking at the whole overview, the P&L of the business and the EBITDA perhaps, that employees don't necessarily see. So the pendulum swing goes to the employers with return to work mandates. And then, Ryan, if you can move the next slide, what we see is that between the employer and the employee, it lands somewhere in the middle. So somewhere in the middle is this balance between people working remotely and people coming to the office. And every company had a different swing on this. Some companies said, okay, you can work remotely 3 days a week, but we need you in office 2 days a week. Other companies said, we have corporate headquarters in Oregon. We want you here 3 days a month, but then you can work remotely. People flew in for 3 days a month, worked together, collaborated, and out. Whatever that balance is for the company, it is fine. You just need to make sure that you're accommodating most of your employees. Okay. So, here at my company, the most of us are remote. We all work remotely, but then we get together probably once a month to collaborate on different initiatives and so on. So you're coming back to the middle on these initiatives. But for sure, if the employer is thinking about releasing new policies, in fact, they always should consider how are the employees going to take that, and what is the pushback from the employee side. So, consider that pendulum again. Whatever we do, there's a pushback on the other side. So we think that the employee experience today is what matters. In fact, we don't just think that, we know that because we've surveyed, 1,500 HR directors all over the United States. And there's a misperception that some employers think that the experience that the employees have at work has really gotten out of control. And employees are really wanting so many more things that employers could provide. When we surveyed these HR directors, they actually said, no, it's not out of control, that we think everybody deserves to have a good work experience. We call it the XEX factor. Everyone deserves that. And people generally aren't asking for these crazy benefits or crazy compensation plans. They're pretty moderate in what they're asking for. So this slide shows the impact of, initiative on employee experience. So do they have, an experience, and does it impact their customers? And 90% of the respondents says yes. In fact, it does. And so this is a really good point to make when we're thinking about improving our employee experience, because the better the experience is, the better we're going to treat our customers. So we know that. And I'm sure all of you can think of good examples going into a store or what have you, and somebody's having a bad day and they're taking it out on the customers. That's going to leave you with a bad taste in their mouth. So we know that having this really great employee experience is going to have a good result with the customers and hopefully profitability for the organization. So fulfillment. So when we talk about keeping employees engaged to the organization, we definitely want to make sure that employees are fulfilled. This helps with retention, but what keeps people engaged at work? So when we surveyed people, 44% of all employees said we want learning opportunities. Now, this is going to be especially true with the younger populations that we're hiring. They're demanding learning. And if we don't provide them learning, they are going to churn, they're going to leave and go somewhere else where they can learn. So we know for that group, the average retention rate is 2 to 3 years if they're not given learning opportunities. So we need to look at things like our learning management system, other industry related sessions that they can join. Managers need to know that they need to be in a constant sense of learning or teaching these employees. What else keeps people engaged? Team meetings. So 40% say team meetings keep us engaged at work. So we need to put a big emphasis on those meetings and make sure that we're doing them regularly. Another 40% said the ability to monitor and manage their own performance kept them engaged. So instead of micromanaging, which was really a Theory X model coming out of World War II, that's a manager that says, sort of, you do what I tell you to do, how you're going to do it. We know that that management style no longer works. And so that generation of sort of command and control managers is leaving the workforce. All right. And now we have, managers who are really encouraging employees to control their own work, monitor their work, ask when they need help, and so on. So all of these three things are keeping people engaged in their job and at work. So there's some interesting statistics to think about. So recent surveys have shown that it's 3 times harder to find talent than it was 3 years ago. So consider that 3 times harder, and this is going to continue to increase as we go into the future. We have a lot of baby boomers that are retiring, and with that is the retirement of a lot of knowledge that they're taking with them. So it's going to get harder and harder to find talent. 69% of employers report talent shortages, which is a 15-year high. So we're having a hard time finding talent. We talk about globalization and hiring employees from other countries and so on. That's part of it. That's how we're pulling in the talent we need for our organizations. So by 2030, in fact, 85 million jobs could go unfulfilled due to talent shortages. Now, some of these are going to be taken over by AI, but for sure, we're still going to need humans to run AI systems, to do other jobs, and use AI as a technology, not necessarily replacing jobs. Jobs are going to be changing. Other statistics, 85% of employees are not engaged in the workplace. So that should be pretty alarming to all of us, that 85% of your workers right now are not engaged in what they're doing, and in fact, maybe looking for another role. Brian, can you advance the slide? Perfect. So with this slide, I wanted to show you, compliance is really at the center when it comes to HR of everything that we do. And we have to keep a keen eye to changes both at the federal level and the state level. So there's different requirements, but based on those requirements, there could be different policies that we recommend based on that. So we have rules that may be in your employee handbook, standard operating procedures that you need to follow, regulations, policies, laws. So as you know, there's a lot to this when it comes to HR compliance. So I wanted to spend a minute and talk about some of that compliance, and this is the FTC final rule on non-competes. So non-compete legislation has been in the works for quite a long time. There's about 8 or 9 states who prohibit non-competes, and several others that have um, really selected provisions on how you can enforce a non-compete. Well, in April, the Federal Trade Commission came out and issued a final rule that basically banned non-competes nationwide. Now, before you jump in there and rip up all of your non-competes, we want you to hold on. So this rule is actually being challenged at the federal level, and by federal agencies and a couple other private industries. So we don't know what the outcome of that legal challenge is going to be at this moment. But for sure, what we want to do is make sure that number one, they're still enforced right now. Um, Ryan, you can move to the next slide actually. So these are some guidance. Who has a non-compete agreement? So think about who has it. Consider how you communicate and notify workers who are bound by existing non-competes that they'll no longer enforce them. So this you'll only do if this legislation gets upheld, right? So we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that. Review and update any existing policies that reference the use of non-compete. So you want to look at your employee handbook and consider if you're going to change any of that. And you definitely want to take steps to protect your trade secrets, any intellectual property, confidential information for sure. Consider all of that. So we want to talk about non-disclosure agreements, non-solicitation agreements, and just consider that regardless as to whether, the non-compete legislation goes through or not, there is legislation on the books, business-to-business legislation that prohibits somebody just from leaving one employer, going to another employer, and stealing confidential information from their companies. So that's going to be prohibited regardless of whether the non-compete legislation goes through or not. So right now, the date that we need to consider is September 4th. That will be the date that this legislation from the FTC goes into force if it's not stopped legally. Now, the other piece of legislation we've been watching carefully is the adjustment of the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the FLSA has been in existence since after World War II. So it's been around for quite a long time. So the piece of this that is changing is the salary component. It's going up slightly. So what we want to make sure we do again is don't do anything yet, but we want you to prepare because July 1st is the cutoff date for this. We do have some legal challenges also on this. We're thinking that the original piece that passed with the FLSA will go through to increase that salary to about 48,000. And we think that the legal challenges January 1st and every 3 years going forward may have some changes to it. So we want to stay on top of that for you for sure. But we want you also to prepare for this now. I mean, we're at June 18th right now, so we want you to identify who those people are that are between those salary levels. Consider if you're going to keep them at an exempt level and increase their salary or keep them at a non-exempt level entitled to overtime. So we want you to be prepared for all of that right now. So that's an update for you on the FTC, where we're going with non-competes, the FLSA, and why this employee experience is just so critical.
Well, thank you, Karyn. That was really fascinating, particularly the portion about how you had that one statistic in there. It's 3 times harder to find talent now, and that is because the older generation is moving on. I really think about that. I was like scribbling some notes, like why? Why is it more difficult? But it seems kind of obvious. You are losing a lot of talent within that generation. So, did have just one quick question as a new manager, right? And I've been doing this about 2 years, so I'm still going to say new. I have a question. What would you
Yeah.
say is something important that I can do for my employees? I saw learning opportunities. Is there any like personal advice that you could give me as somebody new to managing employees?
Yeah, sure, Ryan. We're actually working on some articles right now about quiet vacationing and why that's happening, right? So, this phenomenon on quiet quitting, quiet firing, now quiet vacationing. Why is this happening? It's happening because the younger generation doesn't feel like they can take vacation time, that there's some slight against them if they take vacation time. So they're very, very nervous about it. So instead of putting in for time off, and they may be entitled to it, if they have an afternoon where they have very light work, they're quietly vacationing on, not telling you, Ryan, that they're at the beach or what have you. Anyway, so our guidance is that we really, as managers, need to enforce to our people that vacation time is super important. We all need downtime. So many people, I'm guilty of it as well, will take my computer when I go on vacation just to check in. I mean, it obviously depends on what level you are in the organization. Some people can't disconnect for obvious reasons, but we really should encourage our people to take time off, have some downtime, disconnect. It's okay. Like there's no slight against you. It's not going to stop your career, but we need to understand as managers that that is what the Gen Zs are thinking. That's what some millennials are thinking. That's what the new alpha generation is thinking. So we have to make sure we address that and make sure our managers, like we're talking about it as a management level, not necessarily creating policies. Like we already have paid time off policies, right? But just if managers understand this dynamic that's going on with the younger generation, we can address it with them.
That's a really good one. I still feel guilty if I take vacation, right? I think past vacations, like I've always had some kind of meeting lined up. Yeah, I feel that one big time. But you're right, it is people are probably more productive if they get a little bit of a break. And one of the ways that at least personally, in my experience at Dominion Payroll, one of the things I've appreciated most is like the opportunities that it's given me to connect with local partners, including shout out to the nonprofit that I volunteer for, Comfort Zone Camp, bereavement camp for children who've lost siblings, parents. That one I'm really passionate about. Would not have connected with them without Dominion Payroll. I did see when I was looking at your background, you're part of the Women's Development Center. I thought it was worth talking about. If you could explain a little bit about what that is, what y'all do, and how you became involved with them, that would be great.
Yeah, so, the Women's Development Center is actually an organization that provides low-income housing to people. It originally started for women and children way back in the day to provide a safe place for them to stay that they could afford. Over the years, it's morphed quite a bit to now housing for veterans. It could be elderly, it could be people with disabilities. I think all of you, I live in a pretty expensive area. I don't understand how our kids are even going to, have money to buy homes and so on. But, for sure, people need safe places to stay where they don't need to worry about, where are my kids? Are they in a safe environment or what have you, that they can afford? So, I'm very passionate about that, Ryan. And I got involved through somebody I know through really a networking group who was looking to add board members and they really needed a strong HR presence at a board level. So they asked me to join, and I've been a member now for, I guess, 4 or 5 years, but very passionate about that. I mean, I think that any of us that can give back to these nonprofits, it's such a benefit to the nonprofits. They really need advice and guidance that they may not be able to afford.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's one of the ways that I try to not say incentivize, but tell my employees to get involved. And I don't care what it is that they're passionate about, but something outside of work that I can help them with, or that Dominion Payroll can help them with. So I think that's really great that you're doing that. All this stuff becomes part of our story and helps us in our professional life as well. Um, well, thank you. And we try to keep these. We have about 5 minutes for questions. If anybody has any, we'll give you all a few minutes to put them in the chat. If anybody has any questions, particularly, I thought that was really interesting about the non-compete information. I'm in sales, so you can imagine every sales rep always has a non-compete. It sounds
Yeah.
like there's not even going to. I mean, is there a point to even? I know it's a little bit of a gray area right now. Would there even be a point in kind of pursuing a non-compete if you did have one on file?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Ryan, I think it's so challenging to enforce. I think that this country is really understanding that as employees, we should be able to work anywhere in the country without restriction. However, we cannot steal competitive information. We cannot damage another company, and I think that's still going to be protected, as fair game. But I think that the trend certainly is to allow people to work wherever they want, in whatever capacity they want to work in. So that's really the trend that we're seeing going on in the non-compete area.
But just to be clear, like, taking, what exactly would that fall under? Like, say I'm a sales rep and I take client data. I guess that, is there a law preventing that kind of thing from happening?
So there is anyways. I mean, there's sort of a business to business business law that says you can't do that. You can't go and take confidential information from one employer, go to another employer, use that information or steal clients, that kind of thing. So it is protected anyways. So I don't want anybody to think that, they can go to another employer and do that. You would have to sort of start at ground zero or with leads that you personally get going to the next employer.
Got it. Well, I gotta say, like, keeping up with HR policies and all the changes is exhausting. More kudos to you, Karen. You seem like you're quite the expert, and I know probably be leveraging you in the future if I have some questions. But I want to appreciate just say thank you and say how much I appreciate everybody joining today. This is really like a fascinating topic in an ever-changing landscape. Where I don't think a month goes by where something on the HR sphere doesn't change, and keeping people engaged, that also changes, right? Like what you need to do, how you go about doing it, has obviously evolved. I didn't even think about it over the course of decades, right? Our expectations as both employers and employees has changed quite a bit. So, Karen, thank you again for coming on. If anybody has any questions after this, or you think of anything, or need any help, feel free to reach out to myself. We'll also send out a note with the reporting and a little submission field if you want some more information about anything. So thank you all again, and hope everybody has a great day. Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome. Bye now.